Imagine a mega project so big that more than 150 countries jumped in together. New airports, shiny motorways, and massive seaports were promised. Dreams were painted of future cities that could rival Dubai and Singapore. But today, those same countries are staring at half-finished projects, broken promises, and crumbling concrete. Some are buried under mountains of debt, while others are left with ghostly ruins. This was China's grand global project, proudly named the Belt and Road Initiative. Once upon a time, it was celebrated as the project of the century. But now, it's often called a geopolitical disaster. And the ones paying the heaviest price are the poorer nations, who were sold those glittering dreams. But what exactly went wrong? And why are people now pointing fingers at a superpower like China? Welcome back to the story world. In 2013, when China's President Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative, shortly called BRI, it was hyped as the biggest plan of the century. The idea was simple, yet bold. Create a new Silk Road connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe through railway lines, highways, and ports. The mission? To help poor nations develop and to shine the spotlight on China as a global leader. This vision stunned the world. More than 140 countries showed interest, and many poor nations rushed to borrow money from China. Within no time, China had poured around $1.2 trillion into the project. But here's the catch. This money wasn't charity. It came as loans to countries that Western banks and the IMF had already labeled as too risky to lend to. And soon, the shiny mask slipped off. The BRI wasn't just about building roads and ports. It was China's clever move to expand its economic and political power. You see, China had a big problem back home. Its industries were producing more than the country itself needed. Millions of engineers were graduating every year, but China couldn't give jobs to all of them. So, what was the plan? Export the extra workforce, expand influence abroad, and make poorer nations dependent on China. That's when the real trap began. Something called debt trap diplomacy. China gave out loans so huge that many countries could never pay them back. And when they failed, China swooped in to take control of their land or critical infrastructure. One of the most famous examples is Sri Lanka. Leaders there were promised that a brand new port could turn them into a regional trade hub, just like Dubai. The only issue? They already had Colombo Port, which was perfectly functional. But China lured them with the idea of building another deep-sea port called Hambantota Port on a busy shipping route between the Malacca Strait and the Suez Canal. So, Sri Lanka borrowed $1.3 billion from China. But China added its conditions. Only Chinese firms would construct the port, and if loans weren't repaid, China could take over. The port was built, but here's the shocker. It was practically useless. Feasibility studies showed it wasn't even needed. In fact, only 30 to 40 ships docked there in an entire year. As repayments piled up, Sri Lanka drowned in debt. Finally, in 2017, they had no choice but to hand over the port to a Chinese company on a 99-year lease. Now, all revenue goes to China, while Sri Lanka lost a slice of its sovereignty. But Sri Lanka wasn't alone in this debt spiral. Take Zambia, a small African nation that lives off copper exports. Its leaders dreamed of modernizing the economy, so they signed up for Chinese loans to build multiple projects. They were told Western loans from the IMF came with tough conditions, but they ignored the hidden dangers of Chinese loans, like losing assets if they defaulted. By 2020, 43% of Zambia's debt was owed to China. Then COVID-19 hit. Tourism collapsed, trade stopped, and copper demand fell. Zambia defaulted, trapped in China's web, and then came the so-called white elephant projects. These are massive projects that look impressive, but serve no real purpose. For example, Montenegro, a tiny European country, borrowed $1 billion from China in 2014 to build a highway called the Barboljar project. But the planning was so poor that The planning for Montenegro's highway was so poor that construction began by literally cutting through mountains, but the money ran out halfway. And here's the twist. After spending billions, all they got was a tiny 41-kilometer stretch of road that leads nowhere. This small piece of highway drained so much money that the country's entire economy shook. Today, Montenegro's debt is more than 80% of its GDP, forcing them to beg the IMF and the European Union for help. Sri Lanka, too, tried another trick near Hambantota Port. They built an airport, hoping development would follow. The Matala Rajapaksa International Airport was completed at a cost of $200 million, again through loans from China. But guess what? Airlines weren't interested, passengers never came, and the airport is now called the world's emptiest airport. Flights are so rare that elephants and wild animals are sometimes spotted roaming across the runway. Then comes a tiny South American nation, Ecuador. They were struggling with an energy crisis, so they teamed up with China to build the Coca-Codo-Sinclair Dam, a project worth $2.6 billion. But during construction, Chinese contractors ignored quality standards, bribed officials, and rushed the work. The result? Today, the dam's walls have more than 17,000 cracks. At any moment, it could collapse, turning from an economic failure into a massive human and environmental disaster. Next in line was Pakistan. The Grand China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, was announced with a price tag of $60 billion. Pakistan was promised electricity, jobs, and growth. But most projects either faced long delays or collapsed altogether. In Gwadar, local people protested against lack of water, power, and unfulfilled promises. Jobs never arrived and debt kept piling up. The worst part? Gwadar Port, once under Pakistani authority, is now controlled by China. A shocking 91% of the revenue goes to China, while only 9% is left for Pakistan. The Belt and Road Initiative faced an even bigger blow when Italy, the only G7 nation that had joined, announced its exit. China hadn't given Italy direct cash loans, but instead signed MOUs, Memorandums of Understanding, promising trade deals and investments. However, most projects never materialized, and Italy barely saw any economic benefits. Later, the Italian government openly called it a big mistake and walked out, and Italy wasn't alone. Countries like Malaysia, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Nepal also canceled or renegotiated several BRI projects, realizing the terms were unfair. Seeing these failures, the United States and Europe launched their own alternatives. Programs like PGII, Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, and Europe's Global Gateway Program. These initiatives promised transparent, low-interest loans to help nations escape China's debt trap. But on the other side, this failure pushed China and Russia closer together. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine left it isolated, it leaned on China and the BRI to strengthen ties. A new geopolitical axis is now forming, one that challenges American dominance in the world. After 10 years and trillions of dollars, the Belt and Road Initiative is being labeled one of the greatest foreign policy failures of modern history. And the main reason is clear. BRI was never truly about development. It was about China's own interests, exporting extra industrial capacity, securing access to raw materials, boosting geopolitical power, and even promoting its currency, the yuan, since most loans were given in Chinese currency. Today, the BRI stands at a crossroads. China is trying to rebrand it as BRI 2.0, focusing more on digital infrastructure, green energy, and sustainable projects. But the world isn't so easily convinced anymore. Nations now want projects that bring real economic benefits, not just mountains of debt. So the question remains, if so many countries lost out, did China actually benefit? Not exactly. China wanted to expand its control, but instead, it got branded as the master of debt trap diplomacy. The BRI also slowed down China's own economy, as it now struggles to recover loans and manage the costly infrastructure it seized. Still, there's one big win for China. Through the BRI, it gained direct or indirect stakes in over 100 ports worldwide, strengthening its export economy. And if the entire BRI network is ever completed, It could become the world's largest road-rail sea connection, covering nearly 65% of the global population, and that, my friends, is the rise and stumble of the Belt and Road Initiative. Hopefully, you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most dramatic global projects of our time. Don't forget to like, share, and drop your awesome comments. We'll meet again in another exciting video.